Good afternoon. My name is Derek Mosley. I'm the director of Marquette Law School's Lubar Center for Public Policy Research and Civic Education. And I wanted to welcome you all today to our On the Issues program, focusing on tariffs and Wisconsin. You can't open up a newspaper or turn on the news and not hear about tariffs, whether it's 35% on one country, 50% on another country, or 140% on another country. But back in April and May, the Wisconsin Policy Forum did two reports, and the reports have been made available to you here when you walked in. And in those reports, they talked about imports and exports here in the state of Wisconsin. And they talked about how tariffs might have an effect on those imports and exports and the resources that come out of the state of Wisconsin. So I wanted to bring in the Wisconsin Policy Forum to give us a little synopsis of that report. So I'm going to call up to the podium Jason Stein. Jason Stein is the president of the Wisconsin Policy Forum. The forum conducts impartial public policy research and analysis in the state of Wisconsin. So, Mr. Stein, would you please come on up?
Well, thank you to Derek and all of you for that nice welcome. And a real pleasure to be here in the Lubar Center, which really advances some of the same goals and mission as the forum in its work. And I'll be brief because, like you, I want to hear from our panelists. Why does any of this matter when we talk about trade and tariffs? I mean, I think in a nutshell, we live in a state and we live in a city that is really focused on manufacturing, where in the state as a whole, almost 1 in 5 workers is manufacturing. And where all agriculture is another big one. And these are export-oriented industries. And so trade and our trade relations really matter to us as a state. Here you can see left panel is exports, right panel is imports. And what you can see here is, number one, the exports over the last 10 years in Wisconsin, in 2024, we're at 27.5 billion. If you adjust for inflation, really kind of horizontal. You have seen on the import side some growth, 38.9 billion in 2024. What does that give you? It gives you, for the state of Wisconsin, more than $11 billion trade deficit, similar to what we see nationally. And a reminder that even in an export-oriented state, we can't really overcome the trend in this country toward trade imbalances. However, it's important to note that what we're talking about here and what we'll be talking really, I think, throughout this presentation is about goods and commodities. So they're a big part of our economy, but obviously there's services as well that don't figure into the charts that I'm going to show you or to a lot of the trade discussions. And of course, when we think about insurance, when we think about software, when we think about the law, and I know people in this room don't probably see the value of the law, but it's, believe it or not, there is some value that's added in that area in our economy, and they get left out of the discussion. So it's important to remember that. Here's a look at where our exports in the state of Wisconsin are coming from. In the metro markets around the state, Metro Milwaukee in 2023, nearly $10 billion of exports. If you look at the state as a whole, our exports are, and the imports are often some of the same things. Industrial, on the export side, industrial machinery, electrical machinery, medical and scientific instruments. If you lumped them all together, agricultural products of different kinds. On the import side, again, industrial and electrical machinery, pharmaceuticals, vehicle parts. And for the Milwaukee area, it's again a lot of the same industrial and electrical, computer and electronic and transportation equipment. If you look at over the past decade, adjusted for inflation, exports from the Milwaukee market are down about 3%. Even when you look at markets like Madison, where they're up a little bit, it's really, even though that dot is blue, it's really just kind of flat. So you can understand why, at the level of politics, at the level of the public at large, there's a concern about the trade imbalance, and there's a concern about what's happening, and you know, the public and our elected officials giving tariffs a look. But as we think about how to boost our exports, or we think about how to minimize our imports to the degree we want to do those things, it's important to remember what are the relationships that we have to build on. I think appropriately we have someone from Canadian Consul here today. And for Canada, is really our number one and number two trading partner, if you want to think about it that way, nearly $8 billion in 2024. Some of the things that we exported to Canada include paper, plastics, electrical machinery. And again, you're talking about, if you lump together the European Union, really our top four trading destinations go from, really Canada, European Union, Mexico, and China. So, it's a relatively limited number of relationships when you're talking about the flow of trade overall. Let's talk a second about imports. What are we importing into Wisconsin? That includes heavy machinery from China, paper from Canada, vehicles from Mexico, and from Ireland, chemicals, which by chemicals we really mean pharmaceuticals, and by pharmaceuticals we really mean vaccines. And it's been kind of a remarkable growth from Ireland in terms of their vaccine exports. 10 years ago, Ireland wasn't even in the top 35 trading partners for Wisconsin, and it's vaulted all the way to number 4. So it does show you how these things can change in a relatively short time period. But we might look at this and say, well, hey, it sounds reasonable that in Wisconsin we make heavy machinery, we make paper, we don't make vehicles like to the degree we used to, but we make vehicle components and parts. Maybe some tariffs on other countries that are importing these goods into the United States might give an opportunity for Wisconsin businesses. And I think that's true. There's certainly going to be winners and losers of any tariff changes, and that can include winners in our state. At the same time, it's also worth thinking that what are we doing with this heavy machinery that we're importing from China? In some cases, we're using it in industrial context to manufacture ourselves, or to do agriculture, to do other productive work that we want to do. When it comes to Canada and paper, obviously we also make paper here in Wisconsin and compete with Canada. But what's another big industry in Wisconsin? The printing industry. And we also want the printing industry in Wisconsin to succeed and have access to the raw materials that it wants. Same as the steel in China, the steel and aluminum that we import from China. And when we think about vehicles, that's a product that the components and the finished vehicles go back and forth across the lines from Mexico and the United States. If you have a tariff, there has been concerns about how those could be implemented, and could you have a pyramiding effect of multiple tariffs being applied on what in the end is a single finished good. So it's something to think carefully about, because this is an interconnected web, and when you pull one string of it, the whole thing can shake, and maybe shake a little bit more violently than you might have expected. The last thing I'll say before I get to my final slide is, I was just reading the New York Times this morning, and there was an article about how both Kentucky bourbon and Scottish whiskey makers from across the Atlantic were teaming up to oppose the tariffs. Now, on the face of it, maybe somewhat surprising. If you were making bourbon in Kentucky, isn't that a good thing if another form of whiskey gets tariffed and you're able to compete a little bit better? A couple things in the article. One is that these are international conglomerates that make both these days. So that's one aspect of it. Another aspect was, as it turns out, you age Kentucky bourbon in new oak barrels, and you age Scotch, so they tell me, in barrels that have been used. Well, where do they get the barrels from? Apparently, to some degree, from bourbon makers. So, there are connections that are hard to fathom from the outside. It's a big, complex world and a big, complex economy. The last thing I'll say, and this was something a point that we tried to make both in our briefs that we did in the spring and the event that we had this summer, and it was thanks to all the people that appeared at that event, is that when you talk about, tariffs that could be at 50%, that could be at 145%, I think there's a blasé feeling that maybe comes into effect when you talk about tariffs at 13.9%. You think, well, that doesn't seem so aggressive if you've been thinking about them in a much, several times as much. But it's worth remembering that I think to put it in a more homely context, right now we have a 5.5% sales tax in most of the state of Wisconsin. Here in Milwaukee, I guess I got to do the math in my head, it's going to be, 7.9%. So if we suddenly had that double to 15%, we would think that's significant and we would be right. And so the last point to make is when you look at it in the historical context, a 13.9% effective tariff rate, which is what it's being shown here, some numbers from the budget lab at Yale, it is historic. It is something that we have not seen since the time when, my grandparents were being born and growing up. And we don't necessarily know what the full effects of that could be. The last thought I'll leave you with, as I've been following public policy for about 20 years, and sometimes we do have a tendency to talk in apocalyptic terms, and we sometimes underestimate our ability as a society, as an economy, as a people and a nation to just kind of muddle through things, even big things like historic changes in our tariff rates. But nevertheless, we're setting things in motion here that we don't fully understand, and there could be winners and losers, and some of them expected, some of them unexpected. So that's why I appreciate that Marquette brought us in to talk about this, and that we have an ongoing focus on it as a community and as a state, because I think there's going to be things to, one way or another, learn from this experience and hopefully inform our policies going forward. So with that, I will turn it back over to Derek and the rest of the program. Thank you very much. Thank you, James. Thank you.
All right, so before we get started, I want to ask everybody if you could please check your phones and set them to off or vibrate so they don't go off during the rest of the program. And now I want to introduce our panel. I'm going to start all the way on the end. I want to introduce you to Cory Olishansky. He's the Counsel and Trade Commissioner at the Consulate General of Canada. He provides counsel to Canadians in the U.S., including Wisconsin, and promotes Canada's trade interests. So
Thank
welcome,
you very
Cory.
much.
Glad to have
Pleasure
you
to
here.
be here. Thank you.
And someone who's not a stranger to us here at the Lubar Center, because she's been here before as part of our Get to Know program, is Jackie Q. Carter. Jackie's the director of the Port of Milwaukee. The port handles about 2.3 million tons of freight each year. And thanks to Jackie, we are also becoming a destination for cruise ships across the Great Lakes. So could we give a round of applause to Jackie Carter? And someone else who isn't a stranger to us at the Lubar Center, who's also a member of our Get to Know program, is Dale Kooyenga. Dale is the president of and CEO of the MMAC. And MMAC is a 2,000 business member organization, which those members employ about 300,000 people, correct? All right, so we give a round of applause to Dale Kooyenga. So I want to get started. I'll start with you, Dale, because you're the closest to me, if you don't mind. I'm assuming that the MMAC has surveyed its members. Have you gotten a general idea how your members feel about tariffs?
Yeah, as Jason pointed out, this is a complicated issue, and the complexity of our economy today is more complex than it's ever been. So when you talk about tariffs as they were more of an issue back in the early 20th century, today there are exponentially more components that go into manufacturing the economy, and not only is our equipment and everything more complicated with everything in there, but the global supply chain is more complicated than it's ever been as well. So when I say it's a mixed bag, But generally speaking, there is concern with the business community about the tariffs. And not just the tariffs as in a tariff is a tax and it's going to add to the cost of goods, but there's many other concerns that are embedded in there. And in the name of being concise, because a panel, not a speech, I'll try to be clear, concise, and quick on these. But one is just the absolute unpredictable nature of this. Is that all of a sudden one day they're 50%, then they're nothing, and there's deadlines, and there's no deadlines. And businesses can't react quick enough to really figure out what's going on. And what really matters to businesses is often certainty. Just tell me what the rules of the game are. The second thing is that as I sit here with our Canadian friends, and we're here after 9/11, and I think about my time in the military with friends around the world, is relationships matter. And we have to remember that after 9/11, when America was attacked, it was countries that weren't directly attacked, but indirectly attacked, that still said, we're with you, we're with the free world, we're with America, we're with NATO. And they went out and they fought some pretty tough wars with us in Iraq and Afghanistan, not to mention all the trade we've had since then. And so when I talk to business leaders, one of the concerns is exactly what I feel personally, and that is some of the rhetoric out of the White House is so personal and confrontational to some of our allies, and quite frankly, some of the countries that aren't even our allies, but we'd like to keep them in our sphere of influence because we are in a great competition with China. And the concern is that, I heard from one CEO that said, I was in Eastern Europe. They said, we just can't deal with the ups and downs of the populism on the left and the populism on the right. And at least we know with China exactly what we're getting, even though we like American ideals better. So there's really concern that the goodwill, just like the brand of Marquette means something, the brand of Coca-Cola means something, that the brand of America is taking a hit by the confrontational nature that is tied to the rhetoric with tariffs. The cost of tariffs, their taxes. 2, what messages it send to our allies. And 3 is, it's a lot of Washington, D.C. inserting themselves into private business transactions that is quite the opposite of the traditional free market approach that both parties have been moving towards over the last 100 years.
Thank you, Dale. Jackie, in Wisconsin, we make and we grow things. And the port plays a key role in getting those items out to the rest of the nation and to the rest of the world. Could you tell us exactly what the operations are of the port? I remember when you were here before for the Get to Know, you characterized them as 3 sectors. Could you lay out those 3 sectors for us?
So the 3 sectors at Port Milwaukee are going to be our recreational operations, which we partner with Harbor House, Discovery World, Milwaukee World Festivals, and the Lake Express Ferry. So those are businesses that don't necessarily, are not necessarily served by our commercial operations, right? They lease land from us, we do some collaborative marketing, but that's really the extent of the partnership. We have our tourism, which is Great Lakes cruising. You guys probably seen it, actually, Vikings at the port today. So there are cruise ships that come into the Great Lakes, dock in Milwaukee. We serve as a turnaround port, which is really important because turnarounds have a greater impact on the local economy and the regional economy than a transit visit. So what the turnaround means is the cruise ship will they'll dock in Milwaukee. They've got passengers on board that have come from Toronto, which is likely where they've come from. They stop in Milwaukee, they go out and they do tours, they get on the ship, grab their things, they go home, and then the ship turns over, gets a new group. So we're getting 2 groups of passengers. That's compared to a transit visit where there's a group that comes in and they stop, they kind of visit, they go on some tours, and then they get back on the boat and they continue their cruise. So that's the second arm of our business. The main one, and the one that is most likely impacted by what we're talking about today, is our commercial operations. So that is where we are in working with business that move goods in and out of the region by ship, by rail, by truck, right? So all the modes of transportation. So when we think about tariffs, of course, we get international shipments. We are shipping agricultural products into international markets. And so we are looking at our business and working with our partners to really understand how these changes are impacting them. I'll tell you, at the beginning of this year, as we were preparing for what was to come with the tariffs, right? We knew April, May was going to be kind of the target. We saw an influx of goods coming in, people trying to get in under that line, right? So that they could kind of stock up and avoid those fees. We've kind of leveled out and I think we'll be fine. But I think to Dale's point, what we're going to see is the increased cost, because when we hear tariffs, it can sound really foreign, really complicated to the everyday consumer, but it will impact all of us. And so I always tell people tariffs are all of our business, literally, because when we go to those shelves, the grocery stores, and we're picking items up off of the shelves, some of those products have come in from international markets. A prime example is the steel that comes into Port Milwaukee. Some of that is used to make cans for food, right? So a can of coffee, a can of vegetables, things like that. And so those prices are going to be impacted if we continue to see these tariffs rise.
Thank you. Now, could you tell us what kind of objects or what kind of products that come into the port?
Our largest commodities are going to be salt, of course, Wisconsin winters. We know we need that. Steel, and then ag is growing. So that's a newer one. We had an agricultural facility at the port, wasn't part of Port Milwaukee property, but that went out of business. And in 2023, we opened the Agricultural Maritime Export Facility, which is operated by the DeLong Company, a Wisconsin company. They do ag movements all over the country, but they are the major exporter at the port. We were not real big on exporting, but ag is really where we're growing that, and that's all through that new facility. So those are the three: salt, steel, ag. There's some others as well. We get some project cargoes, but those are the ones we see most commonly.
Now, what surprised me in the report that Jason presented, I was unaware of the effect that Canada has on trade here in Wisconsin. So what do we get from Canada into the Milwaukee port?
Most of the salt we get comes from Canada. So very necessary. And I think the thing to also know is it's not just Milwaukee that it impacts, right? Because there's road salt. Yeah, the city has contract. The state salt comes to the port as well. So the state of Wisconsin, what they need to make sure roads are clear all over the state, that comes in through the port. So, and that comes from Canada. We get some from Detroit, some from Cleveland, but most of it is coming from Canada.
Cory, I'm going to go to you real quick and just ask you, what does Wisconsin mean to the Canadian trade environment?
So thank you, first of all, for the question. Thank you, Jason, for the presentation, because I think you sort of showed some of that. The two-way trade between Wisconsin and Canada is $14.2 billion. It's two ways. But what's interesting about Wisconsin is that Wisconsin is one of the states that has a trade surplus with Canada, which is exactly what the administration has been talking about. They want to see trade surpluses. The surplus with Wisconsin has over Canada is $1.6 billion. That's the exact example of what the administration says they want to see across the board, and Wisconsin is a prime example of that. Your question was, what does the trade relationship mean? It means obviously a lot of money. It means that there are something like over 440 Canadian companies that operate in Wisconsin that employ over 17,000 people. So it's a two-way relationship. But I think one of the things, and you know, as someone who works in the Canadian Foreign Service, it sounds cliche to me, but it might not be evident to the audience, is ever since the negotiation of NAFTA, what NAFTA did was it created a situation where we build things together. There's very little that's entirely American made or entirely Canadian made. You might have a finished product that's coming out of Wisconsin with imports and inputs from Canada, components from Canada, or vice versa. We talked about paper coming in and going into finished products. That supply chain and those relationships are extremely important to the Canadian economy, to the Wisconsin economy, a heavily manufacturing-based economy. And to upend that would be, I mean, there's a serious economic impact to that. It's an important trade relationship. We talked about relationships. I think we're sort of in a moment here where things aren't great, obviously, in terms of the economic relationship. But I don't think it will always be this way. And I think the relationships between Canadians and Americans on so many levels is so dense that it will take a lot to break that. You talked about September 11th. You know, I think that was the only time that NATO has invoked Article 5, and it was the United States that invoked Article 5 of NATO, which is an attack on one is an attack on all. It was a Canadian commander at NORAD in the North American Aerospace Defense in Colorado. It was a Canadian who was in charge, who was the one who shut down American airspace at that time. And so many of those flights were diverted to small towns in Canada. The famous story of Gander, Newfoundland. If you can imagine what Gander is, I think Neenah looks big compared to Gander. And this is a town that took in dozens of giant transatlantic flights and housed those people for a long time because they couldn't come here. I think my point is that those relationships are so tight that I don't think they're going anywhere that fast. I think it would take a lot to undo them. But at the same time, you talked about the brand of the United States. When Canada and the United States negotiated, and Mexico negotiated the USMCA or CUSMA or the new NAFTA, whatever you want to call it, at the time, the administration, the current president at the time said it was the best trade agreement ever negotiated, ever. Full stop. And so we thought we had a great deal. And so now to hear that that deal is somehow unsatisfactory and that there need to be tariffs, that's really concerning to us. And it makes us wonder, well, if that was the greatest deal ever negotiated, what more do you want or need from us? Because we thought we had a really good relationship and we thought things were going great. So that took us a little off guard.
I bet. Dale, I heard you surveyed members of the MMAC, and I've read papers and articles in regards to Mexico and Canada. Most businesses understand that we shouldn't really be screwing around with that relationship. But they say they kind of understand the tariffs when they come to China. Could you put that into perspective for us?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because after I was like, I didn't bring up the China thing, because there are members that, particularly in the commodities area, that say this makes sense, and the membership agrees with them. And the reason is that China has absolutely manipulated their economy, in particular with steel. They have now the ability to produce more steel than the rest of the world combined, and it's very clear that they're using that not only for unfair economic practices, but also to build up a Navy that's now larger than the U.S. Navy. So this once again, it's a complicated issue, but the way that you treat Canada in the same breath and Mexico cannot be in the same breath of what you're dealing with China, right? You have to bifurcate that. So when you're talking about China, like we have one specific member who's in the steel industry who says this makes tremendous sense because they have been using the dollars in China not to support their still hundreds of millions of people living in poverty, not to help out other nations in the same way that we have throughout the world, but they've used their revenue as a country to unfairly subsidize their steel industry, and that has to be dealt with. So once again, it's not one size fits all, and there is consensus among the association that China has manipulated, but at the same time, there's also many members who have plants in China, right?
That was going to be my follow-up
I was just
question.
in Taiwan, and it's a very similar sentiment from the Taiwanese business leaders who say, be careful, right? Because they have operations in China as well. Nobody wants to see a hot war with China, with Taiwan, or with the US or anything else. So there is a recognition that there is still trade there. It has to be worked out. I think it's maybe a whole different panel if the whole Henry Kissinger, Richard Nixon experiment as far as bringing China in the global order was net good or net bad. But we are where we're at. And the fact is that the wheels of commerce as they are right now rely upon each other, and there's things they absolutely need from us, and there's things absolutely that we need from them. And so really looking at that with being professional, being diligent, being wise, and looking at what you do with that long term with allies, which is what's so interesting about this, with allies. And the right answer would be to collectively address that issue with allies, not have a liberation day where you have countries around the world that say we're targeting everybody but the US. So that's where there's more consensus on target where the issue is with specific negotiations versus a global retrenchment away from trade, and go from there. And one other thought in there, because I wanted to bring up, as we are as a Jesuit institution, because I think it matters, is there's a moral aspect to trade. There's an ethical aspect to trade. The alternative to trade historically has been colonialism, where large nations with power and guns came in and took without giving. Another other extreme, which I think deserves more study, but it's getting more study, is sometimes just as damaging to a people is coming in with aid and just giving them things and never allowing that economy to develop or grow because you're the savior and you're coming and you're just giving them. There's great books on that called Toxic Charity or Winning Helping Hurts. Somewhere in between there is called trade, right? And we got to remember that trade is not necessarily between nations, it's actually between people and businesses, and you're getting and I'm getting something, right? So you think about this tiny country of Lesotho in Africa, where they make jeans and they send us jeans, and all of a sudden on Liberation Day, they're subject to 50% tariff. Do you know what the per capita income there is? It's $916. The reason that there's a trade deficit is because they can't afford Harley Davidsons. The reason we have trade deficits in these countries is because they're poor and we're rich. And when you're, just thinking on an individual level, if someone is poor in our community and you're rich, it's really, really hard to take someone from that neighborhood and from your neighborhood and somehow come up with an equal trade that's dollar for dollar, right? So I think especially in a Jesuit institution, especially I think as more and more of people in politics and in business drift away from the principles of what traditionally have been our Judeo-Christian tradition, I think there's also a component of here that we need to think about in these discussions, which is the ethical supremacy of trade and how it's a win-win for both parties, and it has been successful of rising people out of poverty through the dignity of work.
Thank you, Dale. For sure.
Oh, I got to clap. Oh, all right.
I'll let you get your flowers.
There you go.
Jackie, Dale had mentioned earlier about this start and stop nature of these tariffs. How did that affect you at the port when you were trying to determine how you're going to assess your business operations?
So we did panic and calm, right? That was kind of the thing. But I think one of the things that the port does, or the port industry is good about, is operating as a group, as an industry. And so we have several membership associations that we're part of. So one is regional, one's national, one is for the inland waterways. And all of the associations, we collectively we felt like we needed to educate, because there's no way that with the intent that we feel like is behind some of these decisions, they're going to get what they're looking for by doing the things that they're doing. So I'll give an example. One of the things that came out really early on was there was going to be this proposal from the U.S. Trade Administrator. He was going to impose this tariff on ships, right? So there's going to be this hundreds of thousands of dollars up to $1.5 million fee on each ship that came into the U.S. that was importing goods from other countries, and that was for every ship, every trip, every port. Well, the Great Lakes, it essentially would have put us out of business, right, in terms of trade, because the one thing about moving goods by water, the benefit really is that you have the increased capacity, right? So you can move things bulk, much larger commodities, and of course you can get them, overseas. The ships that come in the Great Lakes, though, are much smaller than those that go to coastal ports. And so when you start talking about these fees where you've got a ship whose budget for the year is $6 million, and you're going to charge them $750,000 per visit, it's not really economical for them anymore, right? And so one of the things that happened with these trade associations is that we all kind of got together, we talked about what the issues were, and went to DC to really educate about the impact that this was going to have. So the one thing I'll say, the intent behind this, I think, is more American jobs, recreating industry and strengthening it. I don't think anybody argues against that. I think we'd all love to see things come back. With this one particularly, it was about American shipbuilding and getting back to American shipbuilding. But the issue is, you don't have the capacity to do that tomorrow. We've got to build that. And so in the meantime, if you put these fees on, you're harming the industry. And so what you want to come back will be no more, because now we've destroyed it. And so really educating people, at the federal level, even at the local level, because there were some people that really thought this was a good idea. And then when we went in with these different associations and helped them understand how this is not as good as it sounds, that's part of the work that we have to do. And so we were panicking a bit at first, but I think we all came together and really looked at what is really the bottom line, what are the things that we really need people to understand about how this industry works, and then went out and shared that. And so they backed off a bit. There's still some work to do, but we'll keep at it. We'll keep doing the work and keep trying to help people understand the impacts and hopefully we'll see the changes that we all need.
Thank you. Cory, I'm going to go to you real quick and just ask you, because you mentioned the new NAFTA.
Yeah.
Now, so how do the tariffs affect those agreements that we've already entered into?
So CUSMA, the new NAFTA, is still in force. Incidentally, is the Canada-U.S. Free Trade Agreement, which preceded the original NAFTA. So that's still in force. But these new agreements supersede one another. So if, for example, and we're getting maybe a little bit wonky here, but if, for example, you were to cancel CUSMA right now, I mean, NAFTA has been canceled, but then you would revert back to the Canada-U.S. Free Trade Agreement, which still isn't necessarily as good a deal as CUSMA is, and could also be canceled if, thank you very much, which could also be canceled if either party wanted to. But right now, the situation that we're in is we have CUSMA. There are special tariffs that apply to Canadian steel and aluminum products that are not covered by CUSMA. So Canadian steel, Canadian aluminum, which is produced in Canada much cheaper than it is in the United States, is still hit with a tariff when it comes into this country.
They still what?
It's still hit with a tariff when it comes into the United States from Canada, steel and aluminum. But most goods are covered by CUSMA. Most things that cross the border are covered by the Canada-US-Mexico Free Trade Agreement. And so those things continue to cross the border. Canada is very much open for business. We're very much continuing to trade and want to keep trading under these agreements. When the tariffs first came on, when the president first said we're imposing these broad tariffs at Canada, there was a lot of push within Canada to hit back with dollar for dollar tariffs. And fairly recently, within the last couple of weeks, the Prime Minister has said that we are no longer doing that. We're no longer retaliating with dollar for dollar tariffs. I think there was a realization that what we're saying in the United States applies in Canada as well. Tariffs are harmful. They hurt the population. Why would we impose something self-inflicted like that upon ourselves? It raises costs for Canadians the same way tariffs in the United States raise costs for Americans because they're taxes. But, I want to pick up on something Jackie just said, about how the tariffs on ships were meant to bring back shipbuilding. And we spoke about this on the phone a little bit. An example of the impact of some of these tariffs, the impact that some of these tariffs are having. There's a company that I work with in Illinois. It's an Illinois-based company. It is a very large manufacturer that you have heard of. I won't name it, but you've heard of them. You've used their products. They do almost all their manufacturing in Illinois. And when the tariffs first came out, they called me up in a bit of a panic, and they said, which of my competitors manufacture in Canada? And so I gave them a list, and I said, well, what's this about? And they said, well, if my competitors are manufacturing in Canada and can take advantage of Canada's 51 free trade agreements selling to the rest of the world from Canada, including back to the United States under CUSMA, and my products manufactured in Illinois are hit with a tariff when they go back into Canada, it makes a lot more sense for me to manufacture in Canada where there are free trade agreements. And so we're having a discussion now about some of their manufacturing potentially moving to Canada, which is the exact opposite of what the tariffs are trying to accomplish. They're a self-defeating policy, and they're going to raise the costs on every one of us who live here, myself included. I live here in the United States.
We have a member that has plants in 7 or 8 nations, and in that particular example, they have a plant in Brazil and a plant in India and here in America. And when we were talking about this the other day, he just said because of the retaliatory tariff back and forth with Brazil and how that's escalated, they've just ramped up their Indian production. So now the trade's between India and Brazil, right? So this is the kind of stuff of unintended consequences that you're going to see more and more. And those are decisions that are maybe made right now.
Because India and Brazil are 50% tariffs.
Between those two countries?
No,
here.
with us, yes.
I don't know what is between those two, but you could be rest assured right now, don't be rest assured, be concerned, that right now countries like Brazil and India are negotiating, hey, how can we make this even lower? Let's make this a permanent relationship.
So I read that as of today, before we came on live, we collected $165 billion in revenue from the tariffs. In the month of August, we collected $30 billion alone, compared to $7 billion last year at the same month of August. But we're not talking about who's paying these tariffs that are coming in, who's paying these fees to the federal government.
Well, everyone grab your mirror, and that's who's paying. So the CPI was up 2.9%. That may not sound crazy if you grew up in the 70s, but generally speaking, that's pretty high. The Fed target rate is 2%. So at 2.9%, you're almost 50% higher than the Fed target rate. And that's inflation. And that's primarily, I mean, there's a lot of people with different opinions on this, but it's really hard to point to tariffs not being a significant part of that story. And I think that's going to play itself out more as tariffs work its way through the supply chains. I mean, you have places like Levi Strauss who said, they just shipped 6 months of jeans in for the whole summer. I mean, eventually the inventory that you built before these tariffs is going to catch up to you. Jesuit school, the law school side of this too, is I think, and we've been saying this since the day the tariffs came out, is there's a larger constitutional question on this. And when you throw those billions of dollars out to, it reminds you of the Constitution and the branch of the government as who holds the purse for revenue in America.
Congress.
Congress. And this is what's so frustrating as an association, is the process is that as an association, is I hear from the members, and a lot of members get to tell me things that they don't want to say publicly because they're concerned about both customer retaliation and retaliation from the federal government, which is horrible, by the way. So they confide in an institution like the MMAC. That is my job then to go to the decision makers and say, hey, this is not good for these reasons. But you know what happens when we go into congressional offices on this? They don't have a say. There are a bunch of people with social media and a microphone on this issue, but they don't have any vote on it. And that's constitutionally wrong. The Constitution is very, very clear that the power to tariff resides in the legislature, in the Congress. And so we're going to see some huge drama on this in the next 30 days because this is before the Supreme Court. And what's interesting with before the Supreme Court is that the federal law of emergencies, it'll give the president this power for such sweeping tariffs. And I believe, and the appellate court just believed in a vote of 7-4, that the answer is no, that law does not give them the power. I think there's even a bigger question here, is that does Congress even have the ability to give away what is a constitutional power in the first place, right? So this is going to be a more narrow decision by the Supreme Court that I would guess that the Trump administration is going to lose, because the Supreme Court's decision on similar matters where there was not the power given to the president, for example, President Biden was sweeping debt relief for students, is the Supreme Court said, you don't have that power, and the power of the purse belongs with Congress. And if the Supreme Court continues to follow the rationale they have in that case and many other cases like this, these tariffs will be overturned, and this will be completely up for debate. And it'll be very interesting to see if Congress stands behind tariffs or a policy of this, or if we're completely back to the drawing board. And what is the scope of that? I mean, right now, this doesn't include aluminum and steel, which is a big part of this debate, but this is going to play out, and it's going to be very interesting over the next 30 days. Stay tuned.
Oral arguments start November 1st on that issue.
Can I pick up on
You may,
something?
please.
So look, I don't pretend to have an understanding of the U.S. Constitution or U.S. law to that degree, but I wanted to pick up on the point about talking to political leaders and having agency. And I think everyone in this room has a certain degree of agency. If you agree that the tariffs will raise the cost of living for you, if you agree that tariffs will potentially impact jobs, if you agree that we make things together, not just the United States and Canada, but the United States and other countries as well, if you agree that we make things well in North America and that should continue and that tariffs upend that, all of you you live in a democracy. You all have agency. You can all reach out to your elected officials at all levels and let them know that you think that this is a problem and it's something you're concerned about. Some of you have businesses, you find yourselves in boardrooms. It's something that you can talk about with your peers, with your colleagues, around dinner tables. Not that this is necessarily the most exciting thing to talk about, but it's an important thing that everybody understand, that a tariff is a tax, that it is paid by the importer, which is the United States in this case, that it raises the costs on everyone, and that we do a lot better when trade is free, fair, predictable, and everyone understands the rules of the game.
Thank you, Cory. Check. Oh.
Wow.
Oh, yeah.
All right.
My question for you, Jackie. What are ports across the state, what are ports across the country doing to counter this?
Well, I'll tell you, one of the things that we recognized early on, and we saw this coming, because talks of tariffs happened all during the campaign. Like, we knew if the outcome of the election was that President Trump was elected, that we knew what was happening, right? And so the way we started to kind of prepare ourselves, specifically at Port Milwaukee, but at all the ports, is how do we help businesses to put themselves in a position where they're able to either decrease this impact or eliminate it, right? And so one of the ways that we try to do that is through, there's a federal program called the Foreign Trade Zone program, right? So the way that the program works is, if you are a manufacturer and you have identified a space in your company that is a foreign trade zone, right? You apply, you go through the process, it's approved, you become this foreign trade zone. When you import goods or components or parts and you keep them in that space that has now been identified, it is considered as if those pieces are still outside of the US. So they're treated like they're still in a foreign country. What happens with those is, once they take those parts and they make whatever the finished product is going to be, whether it's cars or appliances, phones, whatever, instead of being taxed on all of the parts, they're only taxed on the finished product. So that can either reduce the amount of tariffs, or if you're going to manufacture those goods here in your foreign trade zone, but then export them back to foreign countries, you have now eliminated the tariff, right? And so there's this program, and so we've been putting in more effort into elevating that program, helping people understand, that it exists, what it can do, and how it can help them. In the years that I've been at Port Milwaukee, we have been lucky to get 2 inquiries about that program in a year. In March of this year, we had not only over 20 some inquiries, but multiple people who went from inquiry to application to activation. And so people are looking at this program to try and release some of that. Now, the way I understand it, and our trade development specialist is really the one who's really an expert on this, and he's actually at a conference right now where they're talking about the Foreign Trade Zone program. One of the things that we're worried about is they're now trying to change some of the rules with this program. And so making it where it may not be as beneficial as it once was. So we'll continue to push the program and elevate it, but we also got to get clear and understand what those changes are going to be and how they might impact the businesses that we thought we would be able to serve.
I've had multiple members tell me that they reached out to Jackie and her team on this, and that they were extremely helpful in the solution. So I think she deserves a round of applause too.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask one more question before I open it up for questions from the audience. I'm going to ask you, Dale, because you said something I saw in an interview that really made sense to me, and I think it's important to stress it. You said that nations rarely trade with each other, that it's more than that. Could you explain what you mean by that statement?
Yeah, so what's interesting in this whole trade imbalance conversation is you make it sound as if the Canadian Prime Minister and the U.S. President sit there and I want elements. What do you want? I want lumber. That's not the way it works. And it doesn't work that way, especially in a representative, democratic, free capitalist society, because it's so complicated. So there's a great libertarian-minded essay called I, Pencil. Who is here had read I, Pencil? I think it's super popular. Did you read it because I brought it up before, or did you read it before that?
I think I heard of it.
Okay. Well, there you go. We're in a law school. You're getting homework. You're all going to Google and read I, Pencil. It will take you about 10 minutes to get through. And the premise of the essay is this, is that nobody knows how to make a pencil. Nobody knows how to make a pencil. The reason is, and the essay goes through and it says, I pencil, is that do you know what kind of wood it is? And do you know how to make the saw to cut down that wood? And then that paint that goes on the pencil, do you know the type of paint that is and how to get it that certain way? And then who makes the steel? And where's the steel came from? And who made the mine? Who made the mining equipment? And the eraser? And it goes on a ship. Do you know how to make a ship? Do you know how to drive a ship? And do you know how to be the port worker that takes those pencils off there, right? Nobody knows how to make a pencil. That's a pencil, right? You go down to Komatsu, look at mining equipment. Who knows how to make mining equipment? So when you are putting tariffs or when you're doing policy on this and you drop it on top of an economy that nobody understands, can we agree that if you don't know how to understand to make a pencil, you don't understand how to make an economy work, right? And so what you do is you make individual decisions as far as what's right for your family, what's right for your budget, what's right for your business or that's why we don't concentrate power typically in DC. That's why in the system we have power, as much as is practical, safe, and good for the collective, is to put that power down at the closest decision maker that can do that own assessment for that one person that knows how to do that, right? And when you're throwing decisions and taxes and regulations, and you're making decisions for people on what they value, right? And so that's at the end of the day where we need to punch through this tariff conversation. I think eventually be resolved. And when it gets resolved, what's really important is that we maintain these relationships that you have on a daily basis with your Canadian friends, and your Taiwanese friends, and friends around the world, because those relationships will matter. And ultimately, that's what will punch us through, and we'll have another time in history where we say what economists say, and that is tariffs do not work, allowing trade to move without the sand in the gears of commerce is to the benefit of all of us, including our nation as a whole.
Thank you, Dale. Just a second. We're going to get a microphone real quick. Oh, yeah, go ahead. Shell, please.
I don't think you understand. I can't hear everything, but to me, that's how we can you hear it?
Yep.
The main issue is who is going to benefit from tariffs. Our company is called Lubar Company, and we are a manufacturing use. And with perhaps 5 companies that are all basically what you're making what different guys in the machine. Probably our biggest product are floorings for these large over-the-road trucks, which are made of wood. And that is the only foreign plant we have, which is in Canada. And we don't import. And to some extent, these tariffs are helpful to us because competitors import. Now, this is the crux of what I'm trying to pass on to you, is who pays for it. And the answer is, you will pay for tariffs.
So I think one of your questions there was, and first of all, let me just thank you, Shell, for everything you do for our community and your family and all the people you hired. But let me unpack your question there, which is who benefits from this? And the answer is there are people that will benefit in moments of time in this. So I think let's just take the agricultural field right now, right? So farmers right now in the grain, soy, corn, they're getting their butts kicked. It is not going well for them right now. The median income for those farmers is below. It's a loss. but there was just over $50 billion put into the One Big Beautiful Bill that bailed them out for more money. But without that bailout, the farmers that are doing very well are the cattle ranchers, right? Because they don't have to buy fertilizer, they don't buy as much heavy equipment, but they're able now, because other nations are saying, we don't want America, you're ticking us off. We don't want your soy and corn. So we're not going to take it. So there's more on the market, which lowers prices. And so the cattle farmers actually are benefiting because the prices are lower there. And so there's an upside for them, right? And I think you could go across different spots right now. And there are people who say, I'm making money right now because of these tariffs. And once again, this is a complicated issue. Tariffs do make sense in targeted places for targeted reasons. There's not one size fits all rule of this, but there are people that benefit. But as a whole, as an economy, it's negative, and those wheels will go the other way, where eventually tariffs will catch up the cattle farmers as well.
If I can add an anecdote to that, something similar.
Yeah, I won. The point I want to make is, in our business, we don't send for them these, and they have one plant, and they'll have more than their half, but doesn't. That's in Canada. So, and we don't the main ship that can, from what's happening is the consumer, the American public, is paying the extra tax because all of our competition there has, we made the one of these other sours for the years next refrigeration and
to like Walmart and Dollar Tree stores, there were refrigerators.
there was a Walmart, so putting a refrigerator. They started to run the fire to bring both for the anyway, I'm not doing a good job of this, but me can surprise the tariffs, which is just pants, will go to the government. What you're doing is reducing the amount of money that the government gets on its other taxes. Like the monies they let go to until their friends of doubts. I mean, it's not a good job out to them, they're covering their taxes, and you're going to make up the records. So they have running deficits, a strange deficit, and that's it. But it was just a very not shit. It's a very difficult kind of to understand what's happening in this country. And for the average guy in Portland, if that goes to the internet price, and the prices of what you're buying are going to go up, and that's the price of the capsule that put the things where guys trading are learning those dollars. And is the thing just on the next of that year, and the proof ultimately ought to be for trade by the press or the other persons that have access to this sort of thing. I mean, we're not seeing it at all. I mean, we have Mexico on one side and Canada on the other. You don't hear peace cleanup. I don't know what they're afraid of.
I think Canada said quite a bit. I think we've been pretty vocal.
Yeah.
Oh yes. I walk around with a notebook with a sticker on the front of it that says, "Tariffs on allies hurt Americans." Tariffs on allies hurt Americans. It's on. I don't have it with me right now, but I walk around everywhere with that. Every meeting I go to, that's on the front of my notebook. We are quite vocal about it. We put up billboards in Milwaukee and other parts of the United States talking about, how tariffs are raising prices on everything. I was going to just tell an anecdote, if you don't mind. I was at a major trade show. It was held in Chicago, and there were a lot of companies there that had finished products with steel in them. And this was just after the tariffs on steel had been raised. And I asked them, well, is this made with imported steel? Where is this from? They said, well, a lot of this steel had previously been imported, but at this point, it doesn't really make a difference to us anymore, because if American steel prices used to be here, let's call it $100, and imported steel, let's say, was $75. Now with the tariffs, the imported steel is, let's say, $150. American steel mills basically raised their prices to $148. So congratulations to them. They're making money. Like we said, some people are going to make money, and good for them. But the people who are continuing to use that steel, the American steel is just as expensive. It's still raising prices across the board, even for the industries that aren't necessarily reshoring or coming back. So I think maybe that was the point you were trying to make, that everybody is going to pay for these, whether you're actually paying the tariff and paying the tax, or whether you're buying something domestic that has raised its prices because it has less foreign competition.
At this point, we're at our time. Would you please give a round of applause to Cory, Jackie, and Dale? Now, our friend from up north has brought some gifts from Canada, and he has he has two gifts he wants to give out, but he has two questions, and whoever can answer those questions.
I actually miscalculated. I've got three, so
Okay.
we're gonna do some trivia. And I guess to win one of these great prizes, first question I have is, can you name the most valuable border crossing between Canada and the United States, and how much is it worth in two-way trade?
Giving away a Mercedes-Benz or a hockey puck?
So, it's a hockey puck. Did you say something?
St. Windsor.
Detroit, Windsor. Do you know how much crosses that border every day? It's $1 billion in two-way trade every day across one bridge. So you get a hockey puck. I'll save it for you. And then I thought I only had one more. I was going to ask, because a big part of my job at the Consulate is promoting Canadian innovation. I was going to ask if anyone can name anything invented in Canada. Anything that has been invented in Canada.
I thought.
Yeah,
Blackberry.
the BlackBerry. But you already have a puck.
I already know a puck.
That doesn't count. Anyone else? Sorry?
Ice.
Well, I don't know if those were. That
was God.
invented.
I was like,
Sorry? I don't know if that's an invention. I think this question isn't working very well. Can
I tried to throw you a ball.
Can I pivot? Can I pivot to another question? Can anyone tell me how many territories and provinces there are in Canada? Don't name them. Just tell me how many there are.
American state. Am I? How many what?
Territories and provinces together there are in Canada.
16, 11, 11,
Give it to the closest.
Give it to the closest. What was that?
5,
5. No.
11. That
12 is the closest.
Hockey puck.
There are 13 provinces and territories in Canada. And I guess last one, and this might be a gimme. What is the biggest city in Canada? Oh, everyone got it.
Everybody gets a puck. You got to bring
Everyone
back
gets
some
a
more
puck.
pucks.
Can
Can we give a round of applause to our guests, please? I just want to bring to your attention, just so you know, October 6th is our next Ethnic Heritage Dinner. It's for Hispanic Heritage Month. It's at the Ivy House. It starts at, doors open at 5, starts at 5:30. We're featuring the foods from Mexico, Venezuela, Cuba, and Brazil. On October 9th, we'll have Chief Aaron Lipsky from the Milwaukee Fire Department. It's Fire Prevention Month, and he has some tidbits he wants everybody to know, so he'll be here for our Get to Know program. And then October 21st, we have Adam Purcell. Adam Purcell was just appointed by Mayor Johnson to the Office of Community Wellness and Safety. It was sort of a controversial appointment, so he wants to be here, and you have an opportunity to ask him questions and see what he has to say. So hope to see you all there. Thank you so much.